Good day, everybody. This is Brian Terry, and it's my pleasure to have with me today Jonathan Ginsberg. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, Brian. Nice to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. It truly is a pleasure. We've watched your work with Social Security Disability for a while, and our audience has a lot of questions, and it's nice of you to spend some time with us to address those. So what I want to just let the audience know is that month in and month out for quite some time now is you have helped people down in the Atlanta area get Social Security disability benefits in a very timely manner and in a lot of cases without having to use a lawyer, which is like the secret, right?
Absolutely.
We're anxious to learn from your perspective all about this topic and how our audience can go through and pursue benefits and get them without spending a lot of money and get them in a timely manner. So things we're anxious to talk about is starting from the beginning. How do you file? Who qualifies? What do you do to get started? What's the criteria, et cetera, et cetera. So just for everybody that's listening out there and myself, I'd be anxious to learn a little bit more about your background. You're doing some great stuff. How long you've been doing it? Tell us a little bit about your practice.
Well, I've been practicing law here in Atlanta for about 20 years, and about half that time I've been doing Social Security disability, representing claimants, people who are disabled and are trying to get approved for disability benefits. And really, since the time I've been doing Social Security, I've been doing a lot of writing about it, writing on blogs and writing websites and articles and things like that. And it's really a very interesting practice, and it's been kind of interesting to watch how it's evolved over the past 10, 15 years. It's really a lot different than it once was, primarily because the numbers have increased so dramatically. People that are now applying, that the numbers have just really got quite large.
Interesting. Just our aging society perhaps has something to do with that.
I think it's partially that it's the aging society. I think that there's a lot of medical conditions, and maybe we'll touch on some of this, like fibromyalgia, which is a real big one. We see a lot of that are relatively recent in the sense of being diagnosed more frequently. I think that as medical technologies improve, that the diagnoses become a little bit more standard, and Social Security recognizes some of these things, maybe things that were keeping people from working before are, nobody really knew what the problems were before, but now we kind of know what they are, and Social Security recognizes them. I think there's more information out there in the public, perhaps thanks to the Internet, about Social Security and its various programs, so that people who really can't work know that there's some way they can get some relief and some cash and money to live on with dignity. Because really what I tell people is that Social Security disability is not going to solve all your problems. It will give you some money to live with a little bit of dignity. And to me, that's probably the biggest dividend of this whole process, is people don't have to worry about it. How are they going to pay their rent, or what are they going to eat, because they have a little bit of money coming in from disability.
Takes care of the basics. So in your work and representing those looking for Social Security benefits, where do you do your work? Is it geographically tied or all over the place, or?
Well, yeah, it can be all over the place. I mean, most of the time I've been pretty much limited to Georgia because I live here, and it's just easier for me to get to various places. But I've gone from Atlanta to Savannah, which is 4 or 5 hours away. I've gone to Birmingham. I've gone as far as Buffalo, New York. I do travel sometimes, but I'm pretty busy with the Atlanta cases, so that kind of keeps me busy. One interesting development that's been happening more recently, though, is that the Atlanta office is so far behind and they're so backed up. I mean, literally 2 years from the time the case reaches the office till the time they schedule a hearing, that they've been bringing in judges from all over the country. So I've had an opportunity in the last 6, 8 months to try cases before judges out of Virginia and West Virginia and California and Pennsylvania. So even though I'm not necessarily traveling to those places, I'm getting a chance to see the judges, how they approach the cases, either differently or not. That's one of the trends in Social Security right now, is they're moving towards video hearings. So a lot of the people that apply, especially if they live in a small state or they live in a place that's not real populated, they may get a hearing done in front of a television with a judge in a remote location. That presents different challenges, but that's kind of what's going on. So to answer your question, I do most of my physical appearances in Georgia and at the Southeast, although with the video onset of video hearings, I suspect that I may be doing more hearings for claimants in various states, but appearing by video.
Wow, technology is certainly getting in the game. It sounds like they're scrambling to keep up.
They are, and, I think that video hearings, there's a place for them, and certainly video hearings are preferable to waiting 2 years to get in front of a live judge. I would say that a video hearing, you do lose a little bit of the connection that you might otherwise make with the judge. So everything else being equal, an in-person hearing is probably preferable. But as I said, if you have a choice of waiting 2 or 3 years to get in front of a judge or getting in front of the judge in 6 or 8 months and doing it by video, the video is probably a good thing to do. I think it's also going to require the judges in these various hearing offices to retrain themselves to not necessarily be so concerned about their sense of what a claimant is about, because there's nothing that really can beat that one-to-one relationship. I think what it also does is it makes the attorney's job or the claimant's job, if they're proceeding without an attorney, has to be that much more focused on providing the right medical documentation, the right reports, filling out the forms correctly, because, again, you lose that face-to-face with a video hearing that you have to make up in other ways. And, again, Social Security is really a lot about speaking the language that Social Security uses, and you've got to know how to do that to win.
Okay, we've got to learn all about that today while we have you here. But speaking of being in front of attorneys, you've obviously had some experience over the years. Any idea how many times you had to go out and represent clients?
I've probably tried well over 1,000 cases. No, I don't necessarily keep track of the actual numbers because I'm too busy preparing new cases and working doing various other things. But I'd say easily over 1,000 people I've represented in hearings, and also through my blogs and websites and email and so forth. I certainly talk to a lot of them as well. So I would say that the numbers, people I've talked to, probably close to a couple of thousand. The ones I've actually represented, over 1,000.
And we're going to talk about this a little more later, but I do understand that at some point in your career, I'm not exactly sure where it was, that you got a critical piece of advice from a judge that actually pulled you aside, gave you this piece of information, and since then your success rate has been fantastic.
Absolutely, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I had really been practicing this area only for just a few months, and I was really focused a lot on the medical issues because, again, Social Security, when you look at it on the surface, it's about somebody's medical problems. And the problem, of course, is that Social Security doesn't really focus, even though Social Security is medical-based, the issue in every single case is really about work capacity.
So when you say medical, like how bad somebody's hurt or hurting, or right?
Right. In other words, here's the best way to look at it. You could have 3 herniated discs, and you could have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and you could have bad liver, you could have all kinds of things, bad heart, but if you can still work, you're not disabled. Whereas a person could have a bad, really painful knee that has failed surgery on the knee that doesn't, and the knee causes excruciating pain, limitation of motion, that person might be disabled because of the pain. So really, it's not so much the specific diagnosis, which is important but not critical. The important thing is how this all affects the claimant's capacity to work. And what this judge did, he's since retired, but I run into him every once in a while, he pulled me aside. He said, I like the way you prepare your cases. You're always prepared. You know your file. He said, but I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're focusing on the medical, whereas you really need to focus on your client's capacity for work. And it all kind of clicked at that point. I just sort of looked at him and I said, I never really thought of it that way, but that's really what this is all about. It's not at all intuitive because, again, you look at the Social Security materials and you see the pages of listings where they talk about medical diagnoses, but ultimately this is really about functional capacity for work. And if you see it that way, everything that you do with Social Security, every form you fill out, every statement you make to them needs to be focused on how this impacts your ability to work, because the definition of disability by Social Security standards is, are you able to engage in what is called substantial gainful activity or work? And if you can't, you are disabled. If you can perform substantial activity, then you are not disabled. So you've got to focus on work capacity.
So our natural tendency, or mine as I think through this process, unfortunately something was to happen to me like this, is that I'm hurt, I feel bad, I'm not able to work. I would think that that's how most look at it. But the system does not look at it that way. They say, yeah, you're hurt, yeah, you have some pain, but you can still work. That's what needs to be proved, correct?
Exactly. And in fact, if you think about it, take it a step further, most lawyers who've done any kind of injury work, if they've done personal injury, car accidents, or they've done workers' comp, they're focused on medical problems because that's really what you got to look at. Social Security is a different animal. It's really about work capacity. And, especially most cases don't necessarily involve one particular medical problem. They may involve numerous problems. You may have an element of depression, for example, in a lot of cases, in addition to that bad knee or in addition to that breathing issue or cardiac problem. So it's a combination of things. It's not any one thing in particular. It's maybe 4 or 5 things, but you add them together. The lung problems maybe limit the person from performing in hot weather or in a dusty environment. The knee problems might eliminate jobs requiring walking. The depression might eliminate categories of jobs that require interaction with coworkers or supervisors. And so you add all these things together, and the end result is a capacity for work that has been so reduced by these various ailments that this individual would not be able to perform competitive work at any all that exists in the national economy. And that's the way Social Security looks at it.
Fantastic info. We're going to zero in on that more, but let's start from the top with this for people. And I think what I would like to learn from you is what are the top challenges that are facing people as they go through the process? And I ask that question because for the listener that's brand new thinking about this, of course they want to avoid the mistakes that cause the challenges and the problems. And for those that are in the process and wondering why they've been denied and they're not getting benefits, they want to correct these. So tell us, if you would, Jonathan, what are the challenges that are out there?
I think there are probably three main things I can point to. The first one, which is a big one, is not being able to get regular medical treatment. Social Security really looks a lot at medical records and a consistent treatment record. And again, ultimately where you're headed with that is you want the doctor to translate those medical problems into very specific work limitations, but you have to have a doctor to support you. And given that this process is now taking sometimes 1.5 to 3 years, claimants have got to have a regular, ongoing source of medical treatment, so they've got a doctor who can comment about their functional capacity. So getting regular treatment is a big, big problem.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just want to pause you right there. Hold your thought. This was great. You said 1 to 3 years. Are you saying it takes 1 to 3 years to complete this process?
It can actually take longer than that. I'm saying that it takes, from the time you apply to the time you actually get your hearing decision, it is not uncommon to be at 3 to 4 years.
Wow. There's really no room for
that. It is really out of control at this point, which is what's leading Social Security to attempt to re-engineer the process. And this is also what's behind all these video hearings, is to try to move things. Again, in Atlanta and in several other states, the actual waiting time from the time you request a hearing, which again may be a year into the process, so you're already at 12 months, it may take another 24 to 28 months to actually get to a hearing. So we may be looking at 3 years before you get to a hearing. Then the judges have to issue the decision, which may take another 6 or 8 months. I've literally, within the last month, tried cases for people who applied in 2001 and 2002, and they're just waiting. And again, inexcusable in my opinion that people who are disabled and probably and obviously not able to work, what are they supposed to do? This is a question I get, a lot of attorneys get.
Yeah.
How do I eat? Where do I live? Well, who's supposed to pay the bills?
Yeah.
And I wish I had an answer for them. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And
Okay.
Social Security, to its credit, is trying to address it, but so far not with a lot of success.
Yeah, even if they cut it in half, it's still too long. So let's back up. Medical treatment, that's the first key, right? You need to have consistent.
Correct.
Okay, consistent medical treatment. Okay.
Right.
Let's move on. This is great information. What would the next?
One more comment about that. When
Okay.
I say regular treatment, I don't necessarily mean they have to go every 2 weeks. It can be, once every 3 months, once every 4 months. It just has to be some sort of an ongoing relationship with the doctor so that the doctor can be a treating physician. Social Security, again, classifies everything, and a physician or a doctor who's treated you ongoing is a treating physician, and that doctor's opinion is given more weight than somebody you may see once or twice. So even if you see them once a year or once every 6 months, that can be considered regular treatment. So I tell my clients, you really have got to figure out a way to get to the doctor, and even if it means going to friends and relatives and borrowing the money, it's worth doing that because Social Security will give a lot more credit to a doctor that you see every 3 or 4 months than one that you've only seen once or twice over that 3 or 4 year period.
So regular could also be termed as consistent treatment. Right?
I think that's a good way to put it, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Good tip.
And the second thing you were asking me is what's the second big issue that's facing people? I think that the delays, and this maybe is part of what we just talked about, but obviously the delays. When you're looking at a 3 to 4 year process, how do you eat? What are you supposed to do during that time? And these delays cause a lot of hardship on people. And again, part of what kind of led me to write my book was how do you get approved early? So, I'm trying my own way to help deal with the delays, but that is a big problem that Social Security recognizes, that I think anybody who's going through the process recognizes that these delays are a real, real big problem.
Okay, so consistent treatment would help that out.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
The third thing I think that is really key to understanding Social Security and trying to avoid these problems is you got to talk their language. Social Security has its own vocabulary, its own way of approaching things. Again, we touched on this a little bit before about the work capacity focus, but you got to learn to speak their language. Either you or your attorney has to know what they're looking for, because again, whether it's a judge or the adjudicator, who's the person at the administrative or the earlier level, they are looking for very specific things. If you know what they're looking for, you can create a theory of your case. You can create an approach that will give them what they want. And that is crucial. I think a lot of people who go into this process, who do it on their own, don't have good representation, they don't know how to speak the language. And again, even an attorney who's done a lot of work in other areas involving injuries, if that attorney, maybe a great attorney in terms of litigating car accident cases, may not understand that this is about work capacity, they could completely miss the boat. And certainly someone who's not represented at all is not going to say, no, this is what they got to focus on, and they may end up wasting a lot of time and effort and not getting to what the judge or the adjudicator wants. So speaking the language is key.
So we need to spend some time learning how to speak the language.
Absolutely.
Now, back on the medical treatment side, we get a lot of questions about my medical records weren't the right medical records. I have problems finding my medical records. So there seems to be some type of, maybe there's a tie-in between the medical treatment and the records are part of this equation. Could you speak to that for us?
Well, certainly. And again, you can have medical treatment, but you've got to have those medical records. And what I tell my clients is that they should keep their own file, first of all. So whenever they go to the doctor, they should ask the doctor for copies of whatever they can, MRI reports or X-ray reports. More than that, they should ask the doctor periodically, if it's every 6 months or once a year, for copies of their file. Because it is not, especially in this day and age, medical practices are bought and sold, files are stored or lost, and someone needs a medical record from a hospital going back 5 or 6 years. It can be very hard to get. In addition, public hospitals are frequently understaffed, and it becomes a real problem to get these records. In Georgia, we have an interesting situation because we can get the records without cost for a disability application. A lot of states don't have that. I know that most places, the actual patient, the claimant, can get the records without a lot of cost. But I think it's important to make an ongoing list. People should do it anyway, really, but make an ongoing list of every place you've been treated at so you can help Social Security by providing a consistent and thorough record. Because, I can't tell you how many times I've had cases where we had to amend the onset date, move forward the date when the person approved for benefits because we didn't have records that went back far enough.
I've had people complain to us that their records have been lost. So if their records are lost and there's no copy of them, wow, what an issue.
Yeah, you're out of luck. And the thing about Social Security, which is kind of nice, is that because it's a fairly informal process, these records don't need to be certified like they would at civil court. So photocopies are fine as compared to state or federal court where you've got to introduce them as evidence. They've got to be certified. They've got to be notarized by a medical custodian. Social Security just takes photocopied records. So the best clients I've got are the ones that come in and they've got this big stack of records, and we've got a lot of the work done. We can go ahead and submit those, and Social Security will accept. Of course, the claimants are involved in this long before they have an attorney or even before they understand they've got a Social Security case. But anybody who's even thinking that disability might be something in their future, it's very important to, number one, keep a current list of the names, addresses, phone numbers, fax numbers for admissions they've seen, but also to keep their own medical file. Because if you don't do it, there's, like you said, there's a good chance, or not a good chance, but there's a possibility that file gets lost or misplaced, and you're out of luck.
This really needs to be treated like a business. You need to keep your files. You need to stay on top of them. You need regular appointments from the medical side, and you need to periodically get your files.
Right, and I'll tell you something else, is that Social Security has been known to lose files. So, again, keep copies of everything you send them. We're at the point now where everything we send Social Security, we spend extra money and send it registered mail, return receipt requested. Because if you don't and they lose the file, then you go in limbo for years and years and years. I had a case that I won about 3 or 4 months ago that, this thing dated back 7 or 8 years. And they lost the file, and we had a copy of it. We sent it to them. They lost that. Finally, after 2 hearings and 3 or 4 reconstructions of the file, we finally got it to the judge, and he approved it. I think more because he just felt so bad for the guy been waiting for so long that he approved it. But, they'll lose files. So, again, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but you've got to be very, very alert to that sort of thing. And, again, we're going to talk about this thing as well, but you've got to make sure you keep track of when you send things in so you know when things are supposed to come back. Because they are dealing with just a flood of paperwork. They're trying to move from a paper system to an electronic system, and things will and do get lost on a regular basis.
Yeah, the stakes are high. It's worth it. Okay, the people that you are working with or coaching or guiding to disability that we talked about briefly in the beginning, that they're successfully getting benefits without a lawyer and they're getting them in a timely fashion. You have mentioned a book. I call it like a how-to guide because it's beyond a book. I've seen it. It's really big and easy to read and all that. Now, this guide that you have prepared, you don't have to tell us everything, but can you give us a sneak preview of what it is and why it's working and successful, and how did you come up with it?
Well, I give a lot of the credit to this to my clients because, doing this day to day, I deal with the forms that Social Security has, and it's just sort of a second nature thing. We fill the forms out, we send them in. And I've had clients, I had one client in particular come to me and say, trying to fill out these forms is real burdensome because if you are you're in a lot of pain, very, very difficult to fill out a bunch of forms, especially these government forms. The forms are, I think I counted over 99 or maybe over 100 at this point, pages of forms. And, of course, these are government forms that put together over time, so they keep getting redone, and they're never really completely redone. They just keep adding things to them. So it's kind of like going back to school. And, again, imagine yourself being disabled and uncomfortable, and you've got to fill out these forms. There's no instructions really to speak of. There's no real guidance as to what they're looking for, and they're asking all these questions, and a lot of the questions look like they're the same thing, and people are supposed to be filling these things out. A lot of times there's not enough room, for example, in the forms to answer the question, what do you do? So I thought about it, and I said, this really makes sense for me to put something together where people can understand what they've got to do to fill the forms out. They can have a reference where they can look and see how the form should be filled out. I give examples in the book of the forms correctly filled out so that someone could use that. Really the big picture is instead of looking at a blank piece of paper, you've got something to look at. You can model your answers after the ones I have on there.
Okay. What I'm hearing, if I get this right, is the forms that are out there to help people apply for Social Security disability are really written and targeted towards a lawyer. Is that right?
Well, I don't think it's so much targeted towards the lawyer. It's targeted towards the people who are making the decision in Social Security. Realize that Social Security, again, has their own language. So they're looking for certain things in these forms. So question 7 on a particular form, there may be a template that the adjudicator has, and they're looking for certain magic words. Well, you don't know that because nobody's telling you that. I mean, I know it because I deal with it all the time. So really what I'm trying to say is that the forms that are out there, they're not at all intuitive or easy to fill out. And what I'm trying to explain to people is this is how you fill them out to speak the language that Social Security's decision makers speak. So that if they ask a question about what you do during the day, they call them activities of daily living. What they're really asking is, if you were in a work environment, would you be able to perform a basic level of activity? So they don't really care whether you vacuum or make your bed, but what they care is if they see activities that are equivalent in some way to work activity, that will go against you. And again, perfect example, vacuuming. Even though you wouldn't think about it, I've had many situations where I've seen that vacuuming is an activity that for whatever reason Social Security sees as being something that is work-like in scope.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing a vacuum has, certain physical implications that mean that you maybe have certain physical capacities. So, when I'm advising somebody and they're talking about what they do, they may vacuum once every 6 months, but you wouldn't want to put vacuuming on there as an activity because it's probably something that would hurt you. Whereas making your bed or dusting occasionally is not going to be a very big deal. Kneeling to clean a tub, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it means that you could potentially do work involving kneeling. So all of these questions have sort of implications, and what I try to do is explain what those implications are and give examples of how to fill the form out where you don't mislead Social Security, but also you don't tell them that you can do things you can't do.
I think you just gave thousands of people a way out of vacuuming and cleaning tubs.
Absolutely. I think I'll use it myself.
Speaking of the lingo, help me with some of the lingo you're using. This term adjudicator, what's
an adjudicator?
What's adjudicator?
Well, adjudicator is basically somebody who works for the state agency. In other words, when you apply for disability, Social Security, the federal agency, has contracted with essentially the Medicaid office, the state offices that deal with Medicaid, to do the initial adjudication or initial decision-making. So these are people that are trained to look at the form and look for certain terms to decide whether or not somebody is disabled. Again, hardworking people, but they're overwhelmed, they're overworked, and they are looking for very, very specific things. And you don't really have much interaction with this adjudicator. They're looking pretty much at paper, which again makes it even more important to have the forms filled out correctly. The adjudicator is the decision maker at the administrative level employed by the state that you live in, and they will make a decision or report back to Social Security, as opposed to a judge, an administrative law judge, who is a federal Social Security employee, and they're looking at it in a much more broad sense. They're looking at big picture things as opposed to magic words.
So back to the guide that you put together, I think I see some steps here. Let's see if I have this right. Put it this way. In the guide going through the forms are out there that people can commonly get forms from Social Security Disability and go this on their own. But what I see here...
Well, let me stop you there, because yes and no. The forms that are in the book are forms that I've collected over the years, and most of those forms are on the Internet and available to the public.
Okay.
However, there has been a push more recently to move people towards an electronic filing system. And so many of the forms are still there, but they're hidden. If you don't know exactly where to look for them, you can't get them because they're trying to get people to file all these things electronically. So the forms that are in the book are actually most of the forms that are used, but the electronic forms, of course, are going to be the same questions but a little bit different format. The big problem problem with the electronic filing is, number one, that it's not particularly reliable. Number two is you sort of answer one or two questions at a time. You don't get to look at the thing as a whole. And I know for me, when I'm filling out a form, I like to look at the whole thing to make sure that I'm not duplicating myself, to kind of know where I'm headed to.
Sure.
So the electronic forms don't really do that. So one of the benefits, I think, to my guide is that you can sort of see the whole thing. You can see what they're looking for and get a sense of really how to answer the question fully. So that's one point about what the book can do. But the forms are available, and some of the forms are actually not on the Internet, in an easily accessible locations. What will happen is Social Security will send it out to the claimant at various times during the case and give you, 10 or 15 days to get them filled in. So, again, the advantage the book has is you've got all that stuff in front of you, so if you get one of these forms and you only have 10 days to fill it out, you've got a reference place you can go look for it.
Yeah. Well, I know from my own work habits, if there's something that's important that I have that I really want to sit down, I print it off, and I like to have it in front of me in the physical format. So that's really what this is. You have the physical format of forms, right?
Basically, what I did is I took all the forms that one would see in a Social Security disability case, printed them out, answered them, and then commented about why I answered them and the way I answered them. So every form may have 2 or 3 sample answers based on various medical conditions. And I also have commentary. This is what I did, why I did it. So that anybody filling it out can understand really the big picture, not both the, let's call it the macro and the micro. Big picture, what you're trying to prove, and examples of here's language you can actually use. You can cut and paste it and use it in your own application, your own appeals, so you can get the best possible result. Because, again, the goal here is to get people approved at the early stages before it gets to a judge. Because remember, when you request a hearing, you may be looking at 2 or 3 years. So the goal here is to get people approved early on, get people approved in 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, as opposed to 3 or 4 years.
Okay, now it's starting to come together. So all of these testimonials of people that have used your guide and have had great results with it, does it really come down to this, is that the guide has everything in front of you in a paper format? That's easy to use. That's not the real key to success. But the answers are filled out correctly and on to kind of speaking the language, so that when these forms go in, the first stop that they're going to make is at this adjudicator level. Is that right?
That's correct.
And
That's
so
correct.
You need to...
I was going to say, and the adjudicators realize they're used to getting sort of this very sloppy, handwritten, it doesn't really say anything. And so all of a sudden somebody comes in with a complete package. It's filled out correctly. There's medical documents associated with it. It's just done professionally. It looks completely different and it stands out. And again,